Welcome to Crimes Beyond Borders, where we'll bring you the most thrilling true crime stories every single day. If you're fascinated by mystery, intrigue, and the darker side of human nature, you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and join us as we unravel the most shocking and perplexing criminal cases from around the world. The story is about to begin after this intro.
From city streets to far-off lands, mystery slipping through our hands. Crimes beyond borders they speak, voices strong but words are meek. Every story leaves a mark, whispers softly in the dark.
Our stories at first are made for ourselves, to comfort us, to help us sleep, and to learn. Along the way, they become a part of our journey, teaching us English and fueling our passion for true crime. So, listen carefully, and if you're about to sleep, close your eyes. Let's begin. Here's a longer, more detailed story about one of the most bizarre and disturbing true crime cases in history. Anatoly Moskvin, a Russian historian whose obsession with death and preservation led him to commit one of the most unusual and horrifying crimes. His strange fascination with mummifying corpses of young girls shocked the world and raised profound questions about the intersection of psychology, necrophilia, and cultural obsession with death. Anatoly Moskvin, the Russian historian who mummified dead girls. In 2011, the quiet town of Nizhny Novgorod, Russia, was rocked by one of the most disturbing discoveries in recent history. Police investigating a series of desecrated graves in local cemeteries uncovered a nightmarish secret hidden inside the apartment of Anatoly Moskvin, a highly respected academic, historian, and linguist. What they found inside his small, cluttered home defied belief. 29 mummified bodies of young girls dressed in colorful clothes seated around his apartment as if they were part of his family. Moskvin's crime was not one of typical violence, but rather of obsessive, macabre desecration. He had spent years exhuming corpses of girls aged 3 to 12 and turning their remains into life-sized dolls, which he kept as companions. The details of his life and crime reveal a deeply troubled individual whose morbid fascination with death and preservation culminated in one of the strangest true crime stories of all time. The early life of Anatoly Moskvin, a dark fascination with death. Born on September 1st, 1966, in Gorky, Russia, now Nizhny Novgorod, Anatoly Yuryevich Moskvin was an incredibly gifted and intelligent child. He displayed a remarkable talent for languages and history, learning more than a dozen languages and becoming an expert in Celtic history, culture, and folklore. Despite his brilliance, there were early signs that Moskvin harbored a disturbing obsession with death. Moskvin later recalled an incident from his childhood that would leave a lasting imprint on his psyche. When he was 13 years old, he was forced by a group of older boys to kiss the face of a deceased 11-year-old girl at her funeral. The experience, though traumatic, ignited a lifelong fascination with death and the rituals surrounding it. Moskvin became increasingly intrigued by graveyards, burials, and mortuary practices. As an adult, Moskvin's fascination with the dead evolved into a deep academic interest. He became a historian, focusing on cemeteries and graveyards as part of his scholarly work. He authored numerous articles and books on the subject, many of which were highly respected by his peers. His extensive knowledge of death rituals earned him the nickname the Cemetery Scholar. Though he was an eccentric figure, few suspected that Moskvin's academic interest in cemeteries was a cover for something much darker. His outward persona as a quiet, intelligent scholar masked a secret life of grotesque obsession, which he indulged by desecrating graves and mummifying the bodies of young girls. The desecration of graves, Moskvin's secret life. By the mid-2000s, Moskvin had become an authority on local cemeteries and often contributed articles to academic journals and local newspapers on the subject of death, burial rites, and preservation of historical tombstones. What his colleagues didn't know is that Moskvin had spent years robbing graves under the cover of darkness. targets were almost exclusively young girls who had died prematurely, either due to illness or accident. For years, Moskvin visited hundreds of cemeteries across Nizhny Novgorod and other regions of Russia. Armed with detailed maps and intimate knowledge of cemetery layouts, he would dig up the graves of young girls, carefully removing their remains under the cover of night. In some cases, he would take detailed notes about their lives, visiting the families to learn more about the deceased girls under the guise of a historian. But Moskvin didn't simply rob the graves to collect bones or for financial gain. Instead, he had a far more bizarre and horrifying purpose. After exhuming the bodies, Moskvin took them back to his apartment, where he began a process of mummification. Using a combination of salt and baking soda, he dried out the corpses, effectively preserving them. He then stuffed their bodies with rags to give them a more lifelike appearance, often inserting music boxes or other mechanical devices into the chest cavities so that the mummified bodies could speak or make noises when touched. After preserving the bodies, Moskvin dressed the mummified girls in bright clothing, including dresses, stockings, and gloves. He even applied makeup to their faces, adding doll-like features such as glass eyes to complete their transformation. Moskvin treated the corpses as though they were living dolls, seating them around his apartment, watching TV with them, celebrating birthdays, and even holding tea parties in their honor. To Moskvin, these were not just corpses. They were his friends, or daughters, as he later referred to them. He believed he could bring them back to life through various esoteric means, including occult rituals and strange ceremonies. He admitted that he would talk to the corpses, sing to them, and watch cartoons with them, as though they were alive. The Discovery, a nightmare in plain sight. For nearly a decade, Moskvin managed to hide his disturbing activities in plain sight. His apartment, filled with the mummified remains of young girls, became a grotesque shrine to his obsession with death. His parents, who occasionally visited him, reportedly believed that the life-size dolls were simply large homemade figurines. They had no idea that they were walking among the remains of real human beings. Moskvin's crimes might have gone undetected for even longer, if not for a series of grave desecrations that began drawing attention in 2011. Local residents and authorities noticed a significant increase in the number of disturbed graves in various cemeteries around Nizhny Novgorod. Many of these graves belonged to young girls who had died under tragic circumstances. The police launched an investigation and began monitoring cemeteries in the area. Eventually, Moskvin was caught on surveillance cameras visiting graves at night, and his activities drew suspicion. When the police arrived at Moskvin's apartment to question him, what they found inside would haunt them forever. Inside the cluttered, dilapidated apartment, authorities discovered 29 mummified bodies, all carefully dressed and arranged in various positions throughout the home. Some of the bodies had music boxes sewn into their rib cages, while others were adorned with toys, dolls, and pictures. Investigators were horrified to realize that these dolls were, in fact, the preserved corpses of young girls who had been stolen from their graves. Moskvin was arrested immediately, and during his interrogation, he freely admitted to his actions. He told investigators that he had been driven by a deep, morbid desire to preserve the girls' bodies and bring them back to life. He also claimed that he believed he could resurrect the girls using ancient spiritual practices. The motivation, a delusion of resurrection. During his confession, Moskvin explained that his obsession with the girls stemmed from his belief that death was not the end and that he could bring the girls' spirits back to life through mummification. He saw himself as a guardian of the girls, protecting them from decay and neglect. He believed that by preserving their bodies, he could keep their souls alive and eventually resurrect them through occult means. Moskvin claimed that he was driven by his longing for companionship and his desire to have children of his own. He saw the young girls as his adopted daughters, and he took care of their bodies as if they were part of his family. In some cases, Moskvin had even gone to the homes of the deceased girls' families, claiming to be a historian interested in learning more about their lives. This allowed him to form a deeper emotional connection with the girls whose graves he would later rob. He admitted to regularly visiting the cemeteries to speak to the dead girls and claimed that they had given him permission to take their bodies and care for them. He viewed himself as a kind of protector, believing that his actions were justified by his love for the deceased girls. When asked if he engaged in sexual acts with the bodies, Moskvin denied any sexual motivation, though many found his claim difficult to believe given the nature of his actions. The public outcry, a nation in shock. The discovery of Anatoly Moskvin's crimes sent shockwaves across Russia and the world. The story of a respected historian and linguist living with the mummified bodies of young girls was so bizarre and horrifying that it seemed more like fiction than reality. News of the crime quickly spread, and the Russian media dubbed Moskvin the Lord of the Mummies, or the Russian doll-maker. The families of the girls whose bodies had been stolen were understandably devastated. Many had no idea that their daughters' graves had been disturbed, and they were horrified to learn that their loved ones' remains had been desecrated and turned into grotesque dolls. Some families were furious at the authorities for failing to protect their children's graves, while others were simply heartbroken at the thought of what had been done to their daughters. Despite the public outrage and the deep grief of the families, the legal proceedings that followed were just as complex as the crime itself. Anatoly Moskvin was not a typical criminal. His actions stemmed from a deeply disturbed psychological state, and this played a significant role in how his case was handled. The trial, declared unfit for punishment. When Anatoly Moskvin was arrested and interrogated, it quickly became clear that his mental state was far from normal. His confessions, while detailed and forthcoming, revealed an individual who was detached from reality. He spoke about his daughters with affection and sincerity, showing no remorse for his actions, which he believed were not only justified, but also benevolent. Psychiatrists examined Moskvin and diagnosed him with schizophrenia, a severe mental illness that had likely influenced his bizarre and horrific behavior. He was found to suffer from delusional disorders that made him believe he could communicate with the dead and even resurrect them. His compulsion to exhume and mummify the bodies was tied to his deeply rooted fantasies of preserving life and defeating death. In 2012, the court ruled that Moskvin was unfit to stand trial due to his mental illness. Instead of facing a traditional prison sentence, he was committed to a psychiatric hospital where he would receive treatment for his condition. Although his actions had caused unimaginable pain and suffering for the families of the deceased girls, Moskvin was deemed legally insane and not responsible for his crimes in the conventional sense. Moskvin's confinement in a psychiatric facility did little to ease the anger of the victims' families, many of whom felt that justice had not been fully served. For them, knowing that their daughters' bodies had been stolen, desecrated, and turned into grotesque dolls was a trauma that could never be undone. While some understood that Moskvin was mentally ill, others believed that his crimes were so horrific that he deserved a harsher punishment, regardless of his mental state. Life in a psychiatric facility and controversy. As of the most recent reports, Anatoly Moskvin remains confined to a psychiatric hospital in Russia. Over the years, there have been occasional updates on his condition, with some reports suggesting that he has shown improvement under psychiatric care. However, these updates have been with skepticism and anger, particularly from the victims' families, who fear that Moskvin could one day be released. In 2019, there were reports that Moskvin had petitioned for his release, claiming that he had made progress in his treatment. This sparked a renewed wave of outrage, as many feared the possibility of him being reintegrated into society. His petition was denied, and he continues to be confined, but the controversy surrounding his potential release highlights the ongoing tension between mental health treatment and public safety in cases involving such extreme crimes. The legacy of Moskvin's crimes, a nation still haunted. The case of Anatoly Moskvin has left a deep scar on the psyche of Nizhny Novgorod and the wider Russian public. His actions are not easily forgotten, and his name has become synonymous with one of the most bizarre and grotesque forms of desecration ever uncovered. The sheer horror of his crime, living with the mummified bodies of children for years, treating them as if they were living dolls, has continued to haunt the collective consciousness. This case also raised important questions about mental illness and the justice system, not only in Russia, but around the world. How should society deal with individuals who commit horrific crimes while suffering from severe mental illness? Where is the line between compassion for mental illness and the need for justice for victims and their families? These are complex questions that the Moskvin case continues to provoke. The psychological profile. A man obsessed with death. Anatoly Moskvin's crime is a chilling study in obsession, psychosis, and necrophilia. His fascination with the dead went beyond mere academic interest. It became an all-consuming fixation. His desire to preserve and care for the mummified bodies of young girls was not about violence or traditional necrophilia as typically defined in criminal terms, but about his delusion that he was saving them from death. His belief that he could eventually resurrect these children underscores the depth of his psychosis. He wasn't just exhuming bodies for pleasure, he was engaging in what he believed was a mission to protect and eventually revive them. Moskvin's actions, though unspeakably disturbing, offer a rare insight into the mind of someone with profound delusions about life, death, and the afterlife. Conclusion: a tale of madness, grief, and horror. The story of Anatoly Moskvin stands out as one of the most disturbing and surreal true crime cases in modern history. His obsession with death, his bizarre rituals of mummification, and his apparent belief that he was acting out of love make this case not only terrifying, but also profoundly tragic. For nearly a decade, he lived with the corpses of young girls, transforming their remains into lifelike dolls as part of his macabre fantasy world. The families of the girls will never truly recover from the violation of their daughters' bodies, and the town of Nizhny Novgorod will forever be associated with the grotesque crimes of its cemetery scholar. While Moskvin's actions were driven by mental illness, the emotional and psychological scars left behind are enduring, and the case continues to provoke horror and fascination in equal measure. Moskvin's crime is a grim reminder of how obsession and mental illness, when unchecked, can lead to acts that defy comprehension. His story remains a chilling example of how the human mind, in its darkest moments, can blur the boundaries between love, death, and unspeakable horror. The story has come to an end, but stay relaxed. If you feel yourself drifting off to sleep, just let the video play and enjoy the soothing music in the background. Let it guide you gently into rest. We'll be here, bringing you more stories every night. Sleep well, and see you tomorrow at 8 p.m.
Dark shadows creep, footsteps vanish down alleys deep. Silent whispers, cities asleep. Mystery in the air, it seeps. Flickering lamps dimly glow, secrets hidden where few will go. In the half-light, truth begins to show. Unseen forces pull and tow. Windows shut, curtains drawn tight. Lonely figures melt in the night. Echoes fade out of sight. Moonlight bathes the world in fright. Ticking clocks, relentless sound. Time slips when danger's around. In the shadows, lost and found. Haunting silence so profound. Flickering lamps dimly glow. Secrets hidden where few will go. In the half-light, truth begins to show. Unseen forces pull and tow. Windows shut, curtains drawn tight. Lonely figures melt in the night. Echoes fade out of sight. Moonlight bathes the world in fright. Ticking cloisters on crumbling walls, telling tales of forbidden calls into the night.